Very pleased to be here with Commissioner Frans today to talk about the price of government report, which MMB is issuing again. When this was introduced back in the early 1990s, it was called by the Minnesota Chamber, Business Partnership, and others as the definitive measure of the cost of government services to Minnesota taxpayers. It measures the total state and local taxes relative to total state personal income. And for fiscal 15, the year that's just concluded, it was 15.4%. The 25-year average is 16.1%. Some of the projections for the out years I'm going to leave to Commissioner Frans because it makes us look good, and of course you never believe that. But the facts are that it's 15.4% for the fiscal year just concluded, below the 25-year average of 16.1%, which says that the costs of government in Minnesota relative to personal income continues to be within a responsible limit and lower than the historical average. And for that, I'll turn it over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Governor. I just wanted to make You don't want me to draw anymore?
Oh, we'd love it.
I'm sorry about the mic. In 1991, the total personal income was about $86.5 billion. So you can see that in how much the economy, the overall growth of Minnesota has occurred since 1991. The total revenues in 1991 were about $14.4 billion. So let me do the math. Just one quick final point about the math so it's clear. In 2016, we're projecting in 2016 that the total personal income in Minnesota will be about $285 billion, and the total revenue collected by state and local governments will be about $43 billion. That gets you to the 15.2% of the price of government. So those are the numbers that we look. The governor's mentioned the average was 16.1% over this 24-year period. The other thing that's happening, personal income is growing at an annual rate of 4.97% every year over this period, and annual revenues are growing about 4.72%. So you can see that overall, year after year, Minnesota continues to have growth in personal income that exceeds the growth in the cost of government. Question?
Mr. Commissioner, could you just from the mic kind of describe what you did at the war, please?
Sure.
I don't draw in public, so I have to do it in him.
That's a good point. I just wanted to point out that the 20-year period that we were talking about, the decline, began in 1994, where the price of government was 17.9%, and in 2014 it was 15.8%. That's about a 12% decline. We're projecting that in 2019 the price of government will drop to an all-time low of 14.6%. It's based on estimates. Every year, we release the price of government 3 times a year after each forecast. So after the November forecast, we'll issue it again because we're re-estimating the personal income. After the February forecast, we'll reissue it. And then we always reissue it after the end of session to show you what, if anything, occurred during the session that changes the relationship of revenues, tuition, and fees to personal income.
Can you tell us, for Minnesotans who see the state budget rising and spending rising, how this compares and why this is important?
Well, I think it's helpful to put a gauge. Back in 1994, when the law was passed, they did it back to 1991 at the time. Back in 1994, as the governor mentioned, folks were concerned about how do we truly compare what people are paying for all these different services. And it's a way to measure the relative value and the relative cost to citizens on an annual basis. Because if you don't sort of have this guideline, it's hard to show people how things are moving in relation to personal income. People are always concerned that we want there's growth in government, but as long as there's growth in government that's commensurate with the growth in the economy and the personal income in the state, we see the relationship that's one that's been fairly steady in Minnesota over the years. There's a lot to do.
You know, total state spending each year, I mean, you've got an increase in population. You've got a chosen increase in expenditures for what we consider important services. The point was made back then, and it was made editorially and by the business community and others, was that we need a way to measure are those spending increases, or in some cases decreases, are they in the proper proportion to total personal income? And so, if we have more people in Minnesota, we'll generate more personal income. We'll also generate more government spending because we'll have more kids in school, we'll have more kids going to college, and more kids needing and people needing other services. So it's a way of balancing out those two numbers. You can. It's hard to find a precise measure because, again, you've got population fluctuations, you've got income fluctuations, and everything else. But this was determined back then. And now that it's favorable to the state of Minnesota, I notice that people like the Minnesota Chamber don't make any mention of it. But back then they were touting it as the definitive word on whether we're spending within our means. And so that's where I think this is significant because, state spending increases every year due to inflation, due to increased population and the like. And if you just take that number in isolation, you say, well, state government spending is increasing, and some people will say it's out of control. This shows it's not out of control. It's within, as the commissioner said, a very narrow band over the last 25 years, and it continues to be. And so to me is a measure that we've chosen. We set a course in terms of spending. We've had during that time Republican governors, Independent Party governor, DFL governors, and we've had DFL and Republican-controlled legislatures, and we've set a band for our spending. We put ourselves on track, and we're operating responsibly within that track.
Governor, I hear critics in my head saying that this is only a way for you to justify more state spending.
Well, I wasn't around in 1994 when this was passed. People like Gene Merriam, who was highly respected fiscal conservative, I didn't make the quotes up back then from the Minnesota Chamber and others who said this is the definitive measure, just because they recognize these factors too. I mean, spending is going to go up over time. Increased population, as I said, population, that means increased personal income. So this is a way they agreed was the most accurate way to measure spending relative to population growth, personal income growth, and the like. So is spending increased in Minnesota? Yes. But it's been necessary to meet the needs of the growing population and the like. And again, what's important is it's within this track that's been established, bipartisan over 25 years.
It looks like it would take until 2019 to get back to the price of government from 2009, which seems like a significant jump within those years. Why is that?
A significant jump. What is the?
Well, in 2009, it was about 14.7, and
Well, because we were borrowing from our schools back then. I mean, that's where, again, if you're talking about honest governing and honest, sound fiscal management, I mean, you can bring these numbers down artificially by borrowing from the schools, by borrowing from other sources, which is what they did. So you can drive those numbers down, but then the next administration or the next generation pays for that.
So is this the school shift that makes 2009 so low?
Well, there's a pretty major event that occurred in 2009, the recession. Well, the recession in 2009. Remember, personal income dropped and revenues dropped really precipitously in a recession. But remember, the key is not looking at an individual year, because individual years can get a little bit distorted. The key is looking at the trend. Which way are we headed, and what is the year in respect to the years before and after it?
Commissioner, just a couple technical questions. Are these figures, one, adjusted for inflation, and two, I wondered how you were measuring the house, I guess the income, the way you calculate this index. Is it a median income that you're using, or how are you aggregating the data?
The Minnesota income is all, so we aggregate all total income, personal income in Minnesota. That includes all sources of income. We try to use the biggest number. Remember, we're trying to make this, and in 1994, they designed it to be as simple and as can be, so you can't, really play with the numbers. So it's total Minnesota income, and what happens in terms of the year-to-year changes is you see that math is just math. I forgot your other question.
Are the figures inflation adjusted?
Oh, no, each year is inflation based, because each year these numbers actually are based on that current year, and each year those numbers are real numbers. So every year that relationship is the same regardless of inflation. That's why it sort of takes inflation out of it.
And can you talk about how you can project, given that the policies and the government spending for the out years hasn't yet been calculated, so that if there's a huge increase in, let's say, pre-K education, that's a significant state spending. Is that calculated in that?
The current law is always projected. So remember, every forecast, in November forecast and February forecast, we take current law and the projections for growth in the economy and match those together, and that's how you come up with those numbers.
Doesn't that make this unrealistic? It assumes that there will be no new state programs? And I know that the governor has some in mind for the electric rate.
It assumes continued growth in personal income too. So what it does is assume, and these programs grow each year based upon projections and inflation. So those projections going forward really match current law, what's projected to be spent over the next 4 years. Combine that with the personal income that we expect.
And last, I know you don't want me to focus on individual years, but what the heck happened in 2014?
2014, so when you look at all these numbers together, the 2012, 2013, 2014, what you're seeing is those are some of the tax increases that we had during that time period, and you see that they've been factored in, and as you go forward with the personal growth, the growth in personal income, that it reaches a different level.
My assumption is 2014 reflects the increase in the taxes on the top 2% and the cigarette tax alike. That's why fiscal 2015 reflects the $500 million in tax cuts that were put in effect for mostly middle-income taxpayers, which always gets left out of the equation. We raised taxes $2.1 billion, but then we cut them the next year $500 million. So for the biennium, it was 1.6 net. So that's my read of why it went up and then down.
Governor, what do you think the price of government should be?
Well, I don't think there's any absolute number. I think it should be within the range that's been established historically, because that's worked for Minnesota. And our economic recovery, which exceeds the national average until our workforce capped, which is what's affecting GDP growth now. But it's overall, it's worked for Minnesota. It's worked better than other states. So I say we're on the right track, and we should stay within that track. And that's what I intend to see that we do. And we pay our bills. We don't artificially deflate these numbers by borrowing rather than raising revenues necessary to operate.
Governor, there have been a number of actions your administration has taken to shore up the state's budget and instill sound fiscal management. I think there have been efforts with the IT department. As you carry out your second term, are you hoping to leave any sort of legacy involving the fiscal management of the state? I mean, there have been, legislators have also criticized in the past what they call accounting gimmicks to balance the budget. I'm curious what you hope to leave behind in terms of fiscal management.
An honest budget, an honest fiscal management without gimmicks, without shifts, without obfuscation. I think the definitive measure of that outside measure are the rating agencies. And we haven't changed the rating we've received from various, the three principal firms, but they've publicly expressed, at least one of them, which one was it?
Standard and Poor's.
An improved,
Outlook.
go ahead.
Improved, yeah. Standard and Poor's improved our outlook from stable to positive and intimated in their report that in the next 2 years, if we continue these practices of honest budgeting and no gimmicks, they could see us going to a AAA rating.
Governor, a few times you've referenced critics who don't want to look at good news. Are you feeling under attack?
I'm always under attack. I'm used to being under attack. That's that's the nature of government. So that's okay. I'm just responding to those who, want to present their view. I'm presenting our view, and they're entitled to their view. But again, you're entitled to your own opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts. And I go back again to the business groups that said back then, and I'm just quoting them, but this was the definitive measure of fiscal accountability, responsibility in state government. I'm saying we meet that test.
Governor, along the same lines, to follow up on that, do you think your administration does not get enough credit for?
We never get enough.
Minnesota?
Never get enough credit.
When other people say that you've turned this around, but you're under a lot of criticism here for spending and taxes. And all
Well, always will be. Any Democratic governor is going to be criticized by Republicans for additional spending. It happens in Washington. It happens in any other state. Stating that I'm under attack does not mean that I'm surprised. It's just the nature of our political process. So, it doesn't surprise me, and it doesn't. But if I see evidence that contradicts that, then I'm gonna bring it forward. And I don't want to get into this. As some governors, well, I'm under attack, and we're not going to leave. I'm not. I don't want to be misunderstood. I get attacked all the time, but that's the job. I signed up for that. I expect that. I'm not bothered by that.
Well, I'm not talking about being under attack. I'm saying, do you think your administration gets enough credit?
Well, I don't know of any administration that thinks they get enough credit. That's part of my job is to put out the good news and hope it gets the same attention that the bad news gets. So that's why we have these news conferences to tout what's positive, and we'll deal with the other ones, which somebody else will put forward. And that's the way the process works. I'm pretty used to the process, and I think it serves the people well. And so, if people are going to put out things that cast us in a negative light, that's their right. And so it's my job, in part, to put out things that put us in a positive light, so people who are out there reading or watching get a balanced view.
Anything else on this topic?
Well, on other topics, I want to start by saying I don't question the story. You guys don't write the headlines, but I was really offended by the headline in today's Star Tribune that said that subsidies were steered toward Commissioner Zelli's firm. That implies wrongdoing. That implies that somebody, and applies to Commissioner Zelli or somebody under his influence in that department, steered subsidies to his family's bus firm, and that's just not true. He ran and continues to be involved in, it's a family business, the premier bus company in Minnesota. And we try to get people from the private sector to come in at financial sacrifice so that they can serve the state of Minnesota. And the facts are the facts. I don't dispute the facts of the story. But for the headline writer to say that means, it says that subsidies were steered to that firm, I take great offense to.
Governor, as a report on that story, if there's an issue with the headline, your office is free to contact me.
Yeah.
But I would say, in defense of the headline writers, it was one column rail, and I didn't think about this until later, but it could have been a pun on the bus company thing this year, but I think it was space constraint. And I thank you for saying that the story was
The facts are the facts. But it is the premier company. The fact that it gets an inordinate percentage of the subsidies going, we want the people in greater Minnesota to get the best possible bus service. So if they're the best, by far and away the best bus company, which in my personal opinion they are, and they have the widest scope, then I would expect and I would want them to get an inordinate share of the subsidies if they earn them and deserve them, and professionals at MnDOT believe that they can best serve the people of Minnesota in that way, then, that would be my explanation, justification for the facts. But I have no issue with the story. I just think the headline was misleading.
And you're confident that nobody in the department did have any influence in that?
Well, that's why we have classified service. If we get somebody from the private sector who's got, personal assets and related to the functions of the department, the law of Minnesota says it's not against the law to have a conflict of interest. It's against the law not to disclose it and not to recuse yourself from the decisions. So, do I think he should divest himself from all aspects and financial connections with the company? I mean, it's a family business. I mean, I wouldn't expect him to take the job if that were a requirement. So we vetted all this in advance. We vetted it with all the proper authorities. The legislature's been well aware of it, and he recuses himself from the decisions. Now, so somebody in the classified service of state government is in a position where they are in order to be able to make those decisions objectively. I thought Senator Hand's comments were very out of line and very unjustified. That implies, again, that somebody would think their job would be threatened or their promotion would be jeopardized if they didn't do what was in the commissioner's financial interest. But otherwise, we're going to have to say, well, nobody can ever come from the private sector in their area of expertise and become involved in leading state government in an area like transportation.
Governor, I asked this question of folks yesterday as well, including, University of Minnesota political scientists, but
Including Minnesota what?
including a political scientist, and ran this narrative by him. For space issues didn't make the story, but I guess I have to ask you directly, knowing that the commissioner, there were steps and recusal procedures laid out when he first took position, but nonetheless, does it not place department employees in an awkward position? You said it yourself, Jefferson Lines is the leading provider of rural bus service in the state. They received $2.3 million, so they're kind of the grill in the room. If at some point a professional staffer thought, another company merited the subsidies and they didn't, is there a conceivable and reasonable scenario by which you can see that having any perceived or real pressure?
Well, if the administration or the agency doesn't have integrity, then I could see how that could happen. But then that person has recourse to make it known that he or she felt under undue pressure, and then that's certainly a story. This is a story too, but that's a different matter. Let me recast that. That's a different matter. But otherwise, you're saying nobody in a position that Commissioner Zelli held in the private sector, where he was the president of his family business, which provides the principal bus service, private bus service in the state of Minnesota, could become commissioner of transportation. That would be a great loss to the state, because he's an excellent commissioner of transportation, and I think he's widely recognized as such by the legislature. Those that are going to be fair about their assessments. In the private sector, he's on the business partnership. He's on the Itasca Foundation. He's established an impeccable reputation for integrity and for professional management and for a commitment to transportation. He's gone all over the state to tell people in Minnesota what they need for the next 10, 20 years in terms of transportation. He didn't have to do that. He could be running his company and making a lot more money and probably improving the prospects of the company under his management. He didn't have to do this. And I don't think that makes him immune from any of these questions. But to say that the MnDOT's going to be corrupted by his presence there, I just disagree.
Governor, the MNsure rates or the rates tomorrow are going to come out. Have you been briefed on them yet?
No, I'm going to get briefed. I've been advised, generally speaking. I've been briefed. I have 2 hours of dental work tomorrow. I'm going to be under Novocaine. I intend to ask him to put enough in to render me mute for the rest of the day.
What's going to be more painful, though?
In the short term, the Novocaine and the press conference is at noon. Again, these are not MNsure's. MNsure doesn't set these rates. MNsure reflects the rates that the insurance companies are charging, and presumably that they would be charging if MNsure didn't exist. I think the question tomorrow for the rate increases should go to the insurance companies. Why are you raising these rates? Why, you had these rates last year, the year before, that were fairly consistent, and if they are increased next tomorrow, as has been suggested, reported, then the question really should go, I mean, they should go to the particular insurance companies who raise those rates. How do you justify those increases on the people of Minnesota?
Did you, have you talked at all with Commissioner Rothman about, giving another go at bringing the proposed rates down in order to, not hit Minnesotans with increases that, if Blue Cross Blue Shield gets his way would be, upwards of 50%?
Well, Commissioner Rothman's already gone through that process. It's a good question for him tomorrow. My understanding is he got some of those rates reduced, not as much as he would like or I would like. But again, he doesn't, we went through this before with the MNsure rates a year ago. He doesn't dictate rate reductions. He can urge them, and he can, his professional staff can, review the numbers that on which the insurance company's decisions are based, and they can question or offer different views about what those numbers justify. But but once these rates are set, they're in place for the next calendar year. So his opportunity to do that has passed. So again, I think the question goes to the insurance companies: why did you if they did increase, why did they do so? How do they justify it?
One of the factors behind this, proposed increase is that the pool isn't as large as people expected going into it, that not as many people as they had hoped have signed up through the individual market. What does that say about Minnesota, and what's a potential, if any, fix going forward?
Well, that's a possibility. And of course, MNsure got off to a bad start, so that probably affects people's willingness to go through. People have other options. People can buy their insurance separate from MNsure. They don't then qualify for the federal subsidy. We obviously hope we can attract more people to MNsure as they see the advantage to themselves, given those that do qualify for the federal subsidy, and their information on the website to make people aware of what the benefits to them financially are if they buy the policy, or if they buy the same policy in the private market, which is going to be similarly priced by the insurance companies. And if somebody out there, another company who's a private insurer, can offer rates significantly less than what's being offered by the companies that are offering through MNsure, then they'll be the beneficiary of that, and then those companies, that's how the competitive system is supposed to work. If somebody else can offer significantly lower rates to insurers, then people are going to go to those companies. They're going to have to show they can break even or make a profit by doing so. But that's the way the process is supposed to work.
Does the prospect of a major increase tomorrow worry you about the overall health and future of Minnesota's individuals?
Well, I dislike it. Certainly, anytime the rates are increased, they come at a cost to Minnesotans, and I dislike that. It undermines the whole attempt to make this Affordable Care Act system work, and to find something that's within the context of private insurers that's going to meet the goal of the Affordable Care Act, which is to have affordable health care as well as accessible health care. And if the insurance companies are going to price themselves out of the reach of Minnesotans and other Americans, we're going to end up with a single payer system, which is what I've supported for 15 or more years now, 15 plus years. So, I mean, I tell people in the private sector who, I think sometimes, wish MNsure would go away and Affordable Care Act would disappear, as some of the candidates for president are proposing. If that happens, there are two options. We either go back to what we had before, where there are minimal government regulations and all the insurers set their own prices, and they make their pitches through advertising promotion to individual customers, businesses, and individuals. And that's why we had over half the personal bankruptcies in America were caused by people who couldn't afford their health insurance bills. And you think, I wonder how long and they get to write the policies and then decide on the policies. They don't have any restrictions on the policies or what the minimum requirements. And they think people of America are going to settle for going back to that kind of carnival. I think they're badly mistaken. And the alternative is a single-payer system where people have a choice of their provider, they have a choice of their doctor. We don't have some of these restrictions now about this plan's covered by this insurer, and this plan, or this doctor, I should say, this doctor the service is not covered by that one. Well, under single payer, it'd all be covered. And the government would, so people would have maximum flexibility, and then there wouldn't be these insurance middle people and all that, 20% plus of administrative overhead that gets tacked onto the medical bills, and they'd go directly and get it paid as Medicare is paid now. And I have no doubt that would win out in public opinion. You'd get all the paid advertising, all the Harry and Louise and all the other ones who would be putting ads and scaring people and everything else about the catastrophe. But if things become bad enough, as they would be if the Affordable Care Act is taken away, then people make that leap of faith. They're going to find they're going to be much better off financially. And all of our healthcare dollars are going to go to provide healthcare and to pay for healthcare rather than 20% plus overhead. So, I mean, I'm not, I support the Affordable Care Act. It's the law, and we're doing our best as possible to make it successful. There are refinements that could be made to improve it, which Congress can't touch because it's so explosive, just as we have problems here in Minnesota because it's such a explosive political issue. So it's sort of locked in now to the way the Affordable Care Act is written. It was written, 2010, 5 years ago, and the way the MNsure was written, a couple years ago. And you're locked in there, even though I'm sure both sides could agree on some improvements and refinements, and the subsidies should be increased, the federal subsidies, but none of that can happen because everybody's at gridlock out there. So it is what it is. But if MNsure collapses, which is you should read Interim Commissioner Allison O'Toole gave some excellent testimony yesterday to a House committee about the fiscal prospect for MNsure. It's on sound financial footing now and into the foreseeable future. So that's not an issue. But if Affordable Care gets undermined and destroyed, people aren't going to be happy. The people who are the critics of it are going to be even less happy with the outcome, is my prediction. But for tomorrow, you can go talk to the insurance companies about why they have to increase these rates.
Another subject, as you probably know, Black Lives Matter is planning a protest of the marathon. This is one of a series of high-profile protests that they have. We've criticized them before. Is there a moment where you should step in and meet with them and try to find a better way to express their concerns?
Well, in fact, I offered to do that this morning, and first of all, understand Mayor Coleman's made that offer. And I was advised indirectly that that would be counterproductive because they still take offense at what I said several weeks ago about their actions at the state fair. I would be willing to do so, but I don't want to do anything that would be counterproductive. But I'm certainly willing to meet with their leadership anytime, and I commend, if that's what Mayor Coleman, I think he just put out a release stating his willingness to do so, and I salute him for doing it, and I hope it's helpful, and I'll play any constructive role I can. I think I'll leave it at that.
What's your reaction to attempts to disrupt this event?
I hope that disruption can be avoided. I think it'll be very major. I don't want to forecast the outcome. I don't want to prejudge the outcome. But I read today that they quoted Martin Luther King about the need to take action. But Martin Luther King took action for a particular reason each time. He didn't take action at his own choosing and disrupt another event for the purposes of a broad, be careful here, of trying to effectuate a broad redesign of society. And I mean, Black Lives Matter. I believe strongly that Black Lives Matter. And I believe my career has demonstrated my commitment to the principle that Black Lives Matter. And I acknowledge that there's discrimination. I acknowledge that there's injustice, that there's inequality. But if that's the basis for taking disruptive actions, somebody could take disruptive actions every day, every night for the foreseeable future. So if there's a particular grievance about whatever it is, then I would ask Black Lives Matter to consider meeting with the mayor, meeting with myself if that's desired, as an alternative to disrupting people who've trained for a long time and are doing and who's participating in a marathon. In my judgment, has no connection with the grievances that they want to put forward. If it's police brutality, if it, quote unquote, what they say is police brutality, I don't know what people running 26.4 miles. I don't understand the connection. Martin Luther King, there was a connection. There was a connection between what he was doing and what he was trying to achieve. He was specific about what it was, and it wasn't just elimination of racism and social injustice and so forth as a requirement to meet his demands. It was, desegregate the school, or open up the bus service to on an integrated basis. There were specific. And I would suggest to Black Lives Matter they could advance their causes if they would be clear with leaders like myself, Mayor Coleman, what it is that they want that's requires change, but it is achievable, potentially achievable with change, and then we have a chance to sit down and discuss that before they take action to back it up.
In addition to local law enforcement, is the state law enforcement prepared to contain and control disruptions in this international?
Well, Commissioner Dolman's been in frequent and ongoing contact with Chief of Police in St. Paul. I'm not privy to everything they discussed. Wouldn't discuss it if I were, but I know that she's closely involved.